Hello, everybody. Once again, this is the Torg Eternity Delphi Council Debriefings, where the storm has a name. Today, we have your hosts, Lehman, Mark, and Rachel returns as the special guest host. Today, we are doing some fan emails that we got, as well as part one of Pan Pacifica. And I will go ahead and just do a disclaimer of out of all languages and dialects and such that I know, Asian countries and languages are not any of them. So please forgive my horrible pronunciations if that occurs. So, having said that, let's just dive into these emails. One is a little short, and the other one is multi question. So the first one we'll get into is from Jeff. It says, "Hello, really enjoying the podcast. I played original Torg for a while in the late '90s and was very happy to see it reprinted. I'm preparing to start GMing soon and was wondering if you could describe narratively and mechanically a reality storm. Perhaps a reality storm occurring between cosmos, I think he means cosms, that wouldn't be in common, living land and cyber papacy, perhaps, or Tharcold and Nile." Thanks again, Jeff. So thank you, Jeff, for writing in. I'm glad that you've picked up Torg Eternity after playing the original Torg, and I hope you're having fun in your Cosmverse. So I can point you towards page, and I know I wrote this down, page 221 in the core books. That's where you get the basic mechanics for reality storms and how that might affect a character. Having said that, for game masters, I highly encourage you to switch around reality storms. No two reality storms, even between the two different realities, should ever be the same because it is weird stuff happening. In the original Torg, there are instances in some of the novels that explain things. In the Torg Eternity core rules, it explains some stuff, and each one of them is very different. You have everything from core Earth and living land interacting, where as these an army troop is going into the living land, not realizing how bad that is for Ords. They start seeing Ords changing into primitive humans and things like that. People's guns stop working. They start disconnecting. You also have weird things where the rain might change and start raining upward, and gravity kind of can go wonky. It can just be lots of crazy, fun things that a game master you can just kind of unleash upon your players and make it very interesting. If it's not something that you really want to deal with, you can just say, okay, hey, everybody give me a reality roll and kind of like a surge, and determine if that affects anybody and then move on. But they can be really cool scenes to add to an adventure or between adventures as your Storm Knights are going through and see lots of crazy things. So, anybody else have anything to state about that?
Yeah, I'll jump in for a minute. So, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it's very much going to be different depending on, what realities you are pulling into it. Um, I know you had specifically asked about cyber papacy, which is kind of near and dear to my heart. And so I love to, anytime we're doing kind of reality storm stuff with cyber papacy, I love the vibes of like the blue electric lightning and all of the um, potential, religious iconography that could be dragged into that. But very much, you can delve into it as deep as your players want that narrative scene to be, or you can do it just very high level and let them know that stuff is weird and going on and it's going to be a bad time. So
Mark.
So the I like the reality storms as like they don't always show up this way, but they're a lot of fun with the boundary layer between two cosms. And sometimes they are very violent and very obvious and very evident, and sometimes they are not. Um, like currents in the ocean where you see the water, but you can't see the current. And when you get into it and it starts pulling you, now you feel the current. Sometimes, you get into a reality storm and you don't know that it's there, and all of a sudden, bang, there it is. As an experienced storm knight crossing boundaries, you expect or you would expect that, hey, there's an opportunity that it's going to be here. And for game masters, it's not always there. And I wouldn't always put it there either, because if you look at the tables when you deal with a reality storm and make your reality test, you can, if the storm knights are prepared for it, they can bump up their possibilities by sucking a few out of the storm, which is always cool. So it's not necessarily a totally negative thing because they can lose some too. But I would make it I would make it cinematically unique to when it's appropriate to have a visible storm or an invisible storm, however you want to roll with it, show up when it's appropriate to the situation that, when if they're just, if you're like, nothing happening here, nothing happening here, and we got to cross a boundary in between, but we got to get here for the cool stuff to happen. I wouldn't necessarily bog your game down when the taxi crosses the storm, unless you got somebody in the kit who is, they're like a wheelman, and that's their shtick is they drive, and maybe something happens head on that the taxi driver is passed out and this guy's got to drive now. So yeah, call for it and let him shine, let him do his thing. If there's no other reason, then why bog the game down? But beyond that, like Rachel was saying, if you've got two realities mashing together, aspects of both, and if it's Nile Empire and Cyber Papacy, or one of the two of the invading, you've got three there actually, which you never can really have three. But the boundary of two realities really can become unstable, and so you might see some core Earth pop up that's being suppressed by Nile Empire and Cyber Papacy, or whatever the two are that are clashing there. And so you could have three things that are very chaotically swirling around your Storm Knights there, which could be cinematically a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I just as you were talking, I just thought of a visual of Wizard of Oz when Dorothy gets caught up
Yes.
in the tornado, and you're like in this tornado storm, and then the Wicked Witch is just flying on her broomstick, cackling as if, not worried about the tornado at all. Something between the Living Land and Cyber Papacy, you could have it where the characters, maybe the Storm Knights, are hearing music or something that sounds like angel trumpets, and then in the background there's like a thematic beating of primitive drums happening. It doesn't have to be visual. It can be as psychedelic, I guess would be a good word, as you want it. You can start tasting colors and hearing flavors and weird stuff
Oh
like
yeah.
that. Just, look at the two cosms, the two different realities, and figure out where that shift is. If one of them's dominant, it's going to show a little bit more. If they're mixed, they're going to be a little more equal. And if it's on the edge of core Earth in a pure zone, that's really probably going to be where more powerful storms are. So thanks a lot, Jeff, for writing in. Hopefully that gives you some thought. And we'll move on to the next one. So the next one is another email from Dave Haynes. Delphi Council think tank. You said we can ask anything. So 2 years ago, Greg Gordon did an interview with an author who had one Torg novel finished and was working on the second. When do we get the first one? So before I continue, I'll just say I'm not at liberty to say right now, but those novels are not disappeared into the ether. It's just things have happened within those 2 years. So now I will continue the other questions. My nephew wants to play in a caution, but we don't have guidelines yet. I know Deanna said that they are going to land in Hawaii. When will that happen? Do we have official axioms anywhere that I missed? I guess I could use the psionic perks and the Gene Mod perks. Does anyone have other suggestions? Concerning Isle, when Torg Eternity was first announced in 2016-ish, Isle was announced as Lord of the Rings meets Game of Thrones meets Once Upon a Time, which sounded great. Then it came out, and it was just the D&D Cosm, which was disappointed. What do you like to do to give Isle its own feel? If I'm in the Cosm of Isle, not necessarily how it meshes with other Cosms, personally I think it has to do with the laws of magic, light and dark, and legends. Nobody mentioned the particulars of Isle's darkness, how it isn't evil, it seeks knowledge, but I don't want to lead the witnesses. And then also, I am curious on which of the second sets of Isle Cosm cards are your favorites. Dave Haynes. So thank you, Dave, and we'll dig into these questions now. So, Mark, any thoughts on any of those questions?
Yeah, I'm kind of with Dave on this one. When Isle came out as a source book for Torg Eternity, there was a chunk of original Torg that was left out, and namely that was the game of the houses, the grand houses, and the political intrigue that was layered underneath and over and around everything in Isle from original Torg. So how do you spice up Isle from just the fantasy realm? You can bring that level of intrigue back, and that may require you to go on eBay and find one of the old Isle books, which is, there's nothing wrong with that, to get the names of people who run the great houses and the different the names of the houses, etc., and the banners and all the rest of it, depending on how much effort you want to put into it. But then you can build up this intrigue and set up a subplot underneath the possibility war of the great houses vying for position. Pella Ardene came across the bridge leading the army of light to defeat Uthorian, sure, and here came all of her bannermen right behind her in lockstep, looking like good soldiers marching along. But when they got here, well, they did the same thing they were doing back home, and that's dividing up stuff and trying to gain power. And if you want to get some historical stuff that will help you build this out into a thing, go look at how Scotland and England were going back and forth in the time of William Wallace. There was a lot of that's a really good, in my opinion, Scotland, how the lords were being dealt with from England. And instead of looking at it from English and Scottish, just say Isle, and then put them in just different geographic places and start coming up with your own stuff. That'll work great. As far as the darkness goes, and I'm, this may be where I depart from approved, whatever, but darkness is absolutely evil in my game. There's a clear line. Darkness is evil, light is good, and there is no gray area for that. You're either in one or the other. And if you aren't, it's because you don't realize that there's one or the other. And as soon as you do, someone's going to pigeonhole you one way or the other. So let's see, that it's Arthurian. I like it. I approach Isle from an Arthurian standpoint. And I want to do a shout out to last week's episode. Liam had a fantastic Legends thing with the sword and shield, and I'm gonna prompt you to speak on that, because to me, nobody does enough with Legends and the perk and all the rest of it. And so that would be a great way. Just come right up a legend with a couple of steps and some things you can do, and stick that on in the notebook on a piece of paper or in OneNote or whatever, and throw that at them and let them stumble into that and then start working through that.
Rachel.
Yeah. So one of the big things that I consider a difference between Isle and traditional D&D setting is that we do have this really sharp dichotomy between light and dark. So Mark covered a lot of what I would have said,
Sorry.
Anyway, that's all good. With a lot more depth than I would have been able to delve into. So anyway, part of this is run the game that works for your group. If that means that you go pull old stuff and bring it in, even though it's not in Torg Eternity, great. Enjoy it, have fun with it, work with what works with your group. but you also, like I said, you do have this very sharp dichotomy that you can really kind of lean into, because there's no, there's no ifs and maybes in Isle. It is, you have the light, you have the dark, and that is one of the key things that makes it very different than D&D.
Thank you. I'll add first for the Akashan, look at Relics of Power. That's where all the axioms and world laws are. As well as that, let me do a little promotion for the Infiniverse Exchange on Drive-Through RPG. That is where various fans and authors put their unofficial, but it can be canon, stuff out they'll put it on sale for anybody who wants to pick it up. For Akasha specifically, if you want Cosm cards for the Akasha reality, look at Jay Rutley has a Akasha booster set that he has the Cosm cards for that. And I guess to toot my own horn, I have before I was doing anything official with Torg, I was a fan just like everybody else. And my very first Infiniverse Exchange product was the Paraverse, and in that, even before it crashed or it was brought up in Torg Eternity, I have the Star Sphere, which was the original Torg name for Akasha. Somehow I pretty much exactly guessed what the axioms were, so the axioms work, and then I have some various perks for that, so you can look at that as well. That's all on Drive-Through RPG. As well as Mark saying, you can look at eBay on Drive-Through RPG. Also, the original source book for Space Gods is there, which is the Akashan, as well as the original Isle book is there too. When the source books for Torg Eternity were being made, there was a conscious decision to make it focused on the realms and not on the cosm. The realm being the bounded stele on core Earth, not the source of the reality across the Maelstrom bridges. So a lot of that house knowledge wasn't brought over, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It's kind of one of those things where it's kind of apocryphal or para-canon. Para-official, I guess, would be better. It was official in Torg, original Torg. Now it's kind of maybe it is, maybe it isn't until we print it officially. But in your own Cosmverse, use whatever you want in there. And the original Isle source book is really awesome. Also, even though there are certain settings out there that do firearms, the basic fantasy setting of D&D doesn't, and there's black powder in Isle as well, so you can make it more Renaissance-y, and things like that. So you can manipulate it how you want. I agree with Mark. To me, Isle Darkness is a shade of evil. It might seek knowledge. Yes, there might be some ways to gain knowledge, but that's to gain power for evil, selfish reasons. It's kind of along the line of Uthorian's lesser version of corruption. He worked with the Gaunt Man. A lot of those type of things that trigger corruption, trigger darkness, things that would gain you corruption and corruption perks in Aurosh will gain you darkness perks and lead you down the darkness path in Isle. So that's what I see there. And then for my cards, I looked through the second set and I found 4 that I kind of like. Trap, I talked about last time. That is in the original 10, as well as another one was added to the additional 10. But I like the Law of Darkness because that can be really harsh, because characters with you, if you have a darkness or any character with darkness perks gains 3 possibilities, but there's not so many Storm Knights with darkness perks. But those with light perks lose their ability to use those light perks for the rest of the act unless they spend a possibility. So it kind of either it drains them of a resource, it gives you a nice resource of 3, it drains them of either 1, or they can't use their their perks. So that can be kind of harsh. Divine Present, that's one that saved our bacon a couple of times on the stream, where you basically you make a faith total, call out to your deity, and you might get some things like a possibility or something happens, and if you get an outstanding, you get a miracle that happens, and you can get transported to safely, get an important item, the location of a person, things like that. So that can be very useful. Touch of Darkness is a play immediately, and that one is if you perform an act of darkness, anything from deceit to murder, treachery, all evil things, you can then discard this Cosm card and you gain a darkness perk of your choice, which is one of my characters did that. You got a darkness perk. And then Call the Banners, which is pretty cool. Basically, there was an Ord on the other side of, or they're on the side of darkness, but they owe you a favor. It doesn't really get into it. It's kind of connection card that you and the game master can determine how they do it. But you help them, and then now you have a favor to get in return. So I think all of those cards to me were pretty cool and bring out Isle-ishness. Okay, anything else on any of those questions before we move into Pan Pacifica? Okay, so for Pan Pacifica, we'll jump into the axioms. We'll go over the major and minor world laws, and that's probably where we'll end up because Pan Pacifica is a reality of change. So there's going to be some changes that we get into. So to start off, axioms: magic is 4, extremely low. Social is 24, which is a bit above Core Earth at 23. Spirit is one of those changes. It was an 8, and now it is a 10, which is the equivalent of Core Earth. And Tech is 24, which again is 1 axiom point higher than Core Earth's 23. So, thoughts from Mark about axioms?
So Pan Pacifica is not really, it's not the lowest in anything. It's not the highest in anything. It's also not like dead middle. It's kind of got extremes, in all things, but it's not to the extreme in any one thing. Yeah, your magic, you've got some rituals. They take some work. You got to get some things, it's very drawn out. It's very labor intensive, but you can do it. Not a lot of people realize that in the cosm, not a lot of people realize that it's something that can happen. They think it's myth and legend, but the true occult practitioners know that it's real, right? Social to me is I get that tech for Pan Pacific is a really they've got a high tech axiom, but to me social is a little more important given how and we'll get into this in the world laws, but given how I need to lock my chair because I keep rocking for you. Sorry, that screws up the camera and everything else. The way that propaganda is absolutely artistically manipulated in Pan Pacifica. I mean, it's masterfully used to manipulate the populace. That kind of to me makes social the most important axiom as far as Pan Pacific is concerned. Spirit, yeah, the miracles are a thing, but it's not really not a lot. It's kind of like magic that way. It's just high enough to where you can get some stuff to happen, but nobody really believes that it's until they have it happen to them. Other than that, it's like, yeah, it's my Bob's sister's uncle's cousin's wife said that this thing happened, and you're like, oh, really? Okay, that kind of fishy. And then tech is, like you said, like Lehman said, it's 1 above Earth. It's 2 below. It's 1 below Tharcold and 2 below Cyber Papacy. So they don't have the cool hotness, but they got some neat stuff.
Rachel.
Yeah, so one of the things that I love about Pan Pacifica is that it is actually pretty close to Core Earth in a lot of regards. except that, then we have all this flavor, especially with this social axiom, like Mark was mentioning, that I'm sure we'll talk about quite a bit in a minute or two. But it's so close and yet very different. So.
Yes, I'll point out even the raising of the spirit from 8 to 10, that doesn't mean all of a sudden everybody knows that. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden all those miracles that are now able to be done are being done. Because if one day you go to sleep and it's 8 and the next day you wake up and it's 10, you have the same knowledge as you did before. So it's going to take a while for that to spread out. So it's very new. It's very rare, and it would almost be unsettling to the most of the majority of people if they start seeing ghosts and things like that, and they're not accustomed to it. It's going to be very unsettling.
And then the Ghostbusters show up and they actually work.
Right.
Yeah.
So Mark hit on magic being very lengthy. We talked about the social, how you start getting into with that high of a social, you could start having a utopia, but Pan Pacifica twists it into a dystopia.
No, that's never happening.
Yeah.
They'll tell you it's a utopia, but utopia.
Yes.
And
they'll
utopia,
even
sure. Shank if you disagree.
Yeah, they'll present it even. They have it on TV. TV doesn't lie, right?
No. Nobody's starving. We've got basic. Everybody's fine.
And then
go on basic.
For tech, one of the things that I thought was humorous recently is either on I think it was on the Discord, is all of the new technology that we in the real world have just gotten in the last year or so. People are saying, hey, is this Pan Pacifica introducing stuff to us? Like all the AI art, Midjourney and stuff, how within the last year,
Yep.
but it's slightly off, but it's getting better. And the chat GPT that's going on, and the computer AI programs that are saying, yes, I'm sentient. And then it's like, are they? And with Pan Pacifica, as it was, written back in 2017 or so, AI is limited awareness. So that's why people were, bringing up that as hey, maybe we're hitting that Tech 24. And if we are, what's going on?
No, it ain't there yet.
That's pretty hilarious.
But you just, in my view, Pan Pacifica comes in, and it gives you that stuff that's reasonable. It's like that first iPhone that came out. A year or two before, nobody would have thought about it, but when it came out, everybody's jumping on it. It's not, throw it away, burn it. Except for those few people who are, 5G's giving me cancer, and things like that. But it's close enough. It's close enough for us to understand it and accept it, and they can even lower it. Just because they're Tech 24 doesn't mean that they have to manufacture and make things at 24. They can make it at a higher version of 23 than what Core Earth currently can do. Or even in other realms, they could do it in Isle. They could make it a high 14 that is like bleeding edge of medieval technology and things like that, which I find very, very interesting. So let's get into the major laws, world laws, and we'll go over 4 of them because one of them was replaced. And unlike many things in Torg Eternity, which we specifically keep ambiguous when it comes to timelines, such as adventures, because we want game masters not to feel shoehorned into, I need to do this adventure first and then this one, and what if they overlap? There is a very specific date of day 172 where the law law of
Vengeance.
vengeance was replaced by
Yep.
the law of rationalism. So those we'll talk about those last, but let's get into the law of intrigue. The main I'll just state at the beginning, the main thing that, or one of the interesting things that I found, is originally this was the law that was the Cosm card law and the flavor law that didn't have mechanics. And after the publishing on day 172, when all the shenanigans happen with the changing of the other world laws, now suddenly the law of intrigue is one of the ones that has a mechanical piece to it. So, Mark, what are your thoughts on the law of intrigue?
I love the law of intrigue. The law, I mean, so everybody is scheming against everybody. When you go to the cyber papacy, you expect that everyone is trying to turn you in to get their piety score up. When you come to Pan Pacifica, everybody has a plan, and it's all hidden behind the scenes. And what you see out front, everybody's got a facade, and until you get past that facade, you don't know what the real deal is in anything, because everybody's scheming on everything. At least you should expect them to. And if they're not, you should be worried because you missed it.
Rachel.
Yeah, so I very much love it, because there's so much potential for there just to be layers upon layers, if you want to go that deep. Very much everybody has their own plan. Everybody's, in it for their own benefit is a big part of it as well. So, that person who happened to just be nice to you, why are they being nice to you? And what are they getting out of it? And again, like Mark said, if you don't think they're getting anything out of it, what did you miss? And just because you think you know what they're getting out of it, is that really the end game? Or is that just another puzzle piece in a bigger scheme that's, going to unfold down the road? So I think it's a lot of potential for a lot of really fun storytelling.
Yes, law of intrigue has all of that, where you can have the spies and heists and the turncoats and all of that stuff going on. Mechanical things with it are certain psychic abilities, no matter what their normal range is, now is reduced to touch. So you have mind reading, mind control, memory alterations, things that affect the mind, now require touch. Does it make it useless? No. You can still, hey, shakes, get into a meeting, shake the guy's hand. Now you can do it.
But
But
they know that. They know
But
that.
yeah, they know it's coming.
I mean, so you have to plan. You have to do some things. If it was so easy as it would be everywhere else, the law of intrigue just wouldn't work. So those psychic abilities do have a place. They are important, but they're specifically have been targeted to make it more difficult. If you look through the Pan Pacifica source book, the major corporations and the High Lord, they don't like people having psychic abilities. That's something that is not controlled, so they're trying to crack down on it. So one of the things that the High Lord is going to do is make those things less
Useful.
or they're still useful, but just less accessible. I guess that would be the harder to do.
Okay, fair.
Finding that information is good. It's just going to be harder to find that information.
Right.
So it makes perfect sense that a High Lord who doesn't want people to know that they're a High Lord, or B, know their plans, because Pan Pacifica is the hidden invasion. It's very important that they don't they're not able to have their minds read and that. So this was one that didn't have a thing before. Psychic abilities started occurring more rapidly after a couple of the recent acquisitions made by Pan Pacifica and other cosms, and therefore one of the things that the High Lord did was altered that law of intrigue to give them those mechanical effects. So, like Torg has always been from original Torg, they did it in the past. We do it now. Is we try to make mechanical things have in-game reasons. We try to intertwine those so everything makes sense and not just have something just some mechanic just for something. We try to put it all together and think about how these things would be done. So let's move on to the law of tenacity, the one that didn't change out of all of the world laws. Back to Mark.
So it's I kind of like in the Pan Pacifica book. There's a line about big fish and little fish and giving them a fighting chance, and you could make the argument that this is the reason why there's always a fifth column somewhere in every organization in Pan Pacifica, because there's always the underdog. I mean, the law of the you could also make the argument that core Earth's law of the underdog is kind of influencing Pan Pacifica a little bit and giving the little guy a shot at it, because you've got all these major in original Torg, the megacorps owned entire islands back on Marketplace, right? The whole island was concreted over and it was nothing but a big city, and that was like continents were like that. How do you break into that? It's like saying, I'm going to start the next Amazon or the next Google. How do you even start that
Good
company in your
luck.
garage? Yeah, good luck. Well, in Pan Pacifica, you can start that in your garage.
Yeah.
And you got a shot because the law of tenacity gives you that shot, right? It against all odds, you could succeed.
Yeah, I love the law of tenacity in that it means that you can't discount anybody as a player in all of this intrigue. You know, the maintenance guy who comes to, fix your plumbing could be the key to, his plot could be the one that succeeds. Because again, everybody's scheming. So you can't discount anybody's plans or motivations, because they just might make it work. And that's a lot of fun.
And then to talk about the actual mechanical effect that Storm Knights, or I guess others could use, is you can decide to remove all of your. If you're going to be KO'd by shock, you can transfer or transform, whatever you say. Basically, you get rid of all your shock and you take a wound. Which wounds are much more deadly than shock, but there are those instances where you're going to get KO'd because you've taken too much shock. I have been at points playing where I have spent possibilities, not because I was wounded and was going to test defeat, but because I was going to take a point of shock that was going to knock me out, and I didn't want to get KO'd. So yep. This would, being in Pan Pacifica, this would allow that character who has 4 wounds to take a wound, be just now like everybody else with 3 wounds left, and not have that shock and not being on that danger of passing out, instead of worrying that every round or every turn I'm going to have to spend a possibility against a point of shock.
I hate that. It's also, fatigue comes up, and you got then the possibility of soak 2 points of shock. You're like, really?
Yep.
Yeah, it's very much like you could keep going, but also like the other guy could keep going too.
So I think that is a pretty cool one. Don't forget about it when you are on Pan Pacifica. It's one of those on first thought you go, yeah, like I'm going to exchange shock, which goes away, then for a wound, which, I need to be healed. No, there are those situations where it is to your advantage. So then,
if you're running a shock monkey, though, you can do that. Like I've got a Pan Pacifica Mook Slayer, who's he's gun fu, and he takes shock to do stuff, and he can, in 2 rounds, he can be against his limit
Mm-hmm.
because he's done all this stuff and stacked a bunch of stuff up, and it's like, give me a wound. I get 2 more rounds of just blowing stuff away. Okay, sold. Done.
Yep. So it fits in. It fits into the style. It fits into the people being able to go past those situations that would KO them, give them more use of their vitality perks and paths and things like that. So now we'll go to the law that was replaced, the law of vengeance. So back to Mark about the law of vengeance.
So the law of vengeance it made sense for original Torg, based on how it was built, right? You built it on Japanese culture, on honor, on Bushido, on that kind of thing, and you had to avenge your lord, kind of thing. But it didn't come into play very often, and you had to work hand in glove with the game master in order for it to come into play, and it usually was the culmination of a long story arc that you had to. You didn't just say, hey, I want to be vengeful here, and it happened, and 3 scenes later you're like, hey, I want to be vengeful again, and it just happened. It just didn't work. So from the standpoint of does the law of vengeance make sense for the setting? Yeah, absolutely. From a game mechanic standpoint, was it worth replacing with something else that would be more applicable to more frequently in the game? Absolutely.
Rachel.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that there's, again, potentially a lot of fun to be had with the law of vengeance, but yes, it does require a lot of a lot of planning, a lot of working ahead in order to make it, really come to fruition. But it is such a cool piece of this setting, in that it did get replaced, but it was such a, like, you got to go do that backstabbing, like, core piece of Pacifica that I love it. And it's a good excuse for things to happen, if you feel like you need one.
I wouldn't say it's totally. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, just because the world law has changed doesn't mean the attitude of people
Exactly.
necessarily have. So
Yes.
there still can be that sense of needing vengeance, because, as we'll get further down, axiom washes and transformations occur slower in Pan Pacifica. So when they even change their own stuff, it occurs at a slower rate. All part of that hidden invasion aspect. So my thoughts of the Law of Vengeance are very close to Mark. It was a really the effect was awesome. It was like an additional glory. It was your hand size increased by 1 for the rest of this act and the next act. But that's why they made the condition of it be such a powerful thing. It was you had to get vengeance, and it couldn't have been something that just occurred in this act. It had to be something worthwhile to actually say this is vengeance. It wasn't like, oh, they walked in front of me, I deserve vengeance.
They cut in line. I'm going to kill them.
How dare?
It had to be something dramatic and important. But if everybody in your group has agreed to do a certain adventure and it doesn't have that thing to fit in, that vengeful thing, then it would be very hard to trigger. So that is again why I agree with Mark a lot on that the effect was awesome, the reason was awesome, but how it could get into the game didn't have as many entries. And with our
Can I give you 2 things before you move on? Can I give you 2 things?
Mm-hmm.
If you're a GM who likes the Law of Vengeance and you want to keep it there, or as Rachel pointed out and Lehman pointed out, it's been replaced, but it's not gone. and you want to still have that mechanic there because it makes sense in your setting, which it does. The two easiest ways to get it in your game are character backstory, something that happened in your backstory you can have vengeance for, but as a GM, you're going to have to set that up and have that show up and seed it. And the other one, the easier one, is the Nemesis card, in my opinion. If you, and this is a reward for somebody playing that card, because a lot of times the rest of your players are going to groan when you drop it and give the bad guy 3 more possibilities to throw at you. You're like, oh geez, really? We were getting our butt kicked and now we got to do it again. Okay, whatever. But now you've made a Nemesis. They get away. Okay, there you go. You got to get your vengeance on your Nemesis now. When that Nemesis shows back up an act or 2 or 3 or whatever later, when you take vengeance on them, then okay, there you go. Trigger the law of vengeance.
Yeah, absolutely. As a last addition to that, with the booster pack of cards that has come out with Pan Pacifica, instead of having 5 extra Destiny cards, they have 5 extra Cosm cards, and some of them are to replace the infected things if you, as a game master or your group, doesn't want to do the whole pandemic type infection epidemic thing going on. You can replace those. They also have replacements for the Law of Vengeance cards that kind of triggered off that Law of Vengeance. If you want to have in pockets, and we've always talked about how in some places the axioms might be a little higher or lower, Pan Pacifica especially, they don't like completely getting rid of something. That's why they have reserves of cosms that they've conquered out there with all of their own world laws and axioms, so they can go back and tap that as a resource if they need. There might be pockets or areas which still have that Law of Vengeance in there, and then you can either use the world law and or you can keep those cosm cards in when you deal those out to players and have that happen. So it's not like nobody is saying you must take these out and put these in. It's hey, game master, here's a bunch more tools for you to decide how you want to stack your Cosm card deck and distribute them, or which laws you want to put in or take out. So the one that replaced it with was the Law of Rationalism, which now is the new straight mechanic law. So, Mark, Law of Rationalism.
So this is, I mean, you can sum it up with science.
Yeah.
Right? So psionics kind of stems off of this, but it's, if I can't taste it, touch it, see it, hold it, or feel it, it's not real. And the law of rationalism says that you have to be able, if it's not reproducible, it's not science. And if I can't, it's the theory is not good if I can't give it to somebody else and they get my same results out of scientific method, blah, 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 right? So when you couple that with a low magic axiom and a middling spirit axiom, you can get some folks who just don't believe you can do what you can do, because they're just, it's like, no, what do you mean it's magic?
Yeah.
No. And so that's where for me, that's where the law of rationalism comes into play, is that it sorry, my puppy is playing. That's where the law of rationalism comes in.
Rachel.
I like it in that it's so in keeping with like the mentality of the High Lord, which I'm sure we'll talk about more next time. But very much just, all of that, that magic stuff, not so much a fan. Let's really focus on the science and make that a big deal, make that the true path to knowledge and power and doing cool stuff. So it feels very fitting for the High Lord.
It does.
It does add 2. They're the same ones, but it adds 2 Cosm cards of tech supremacy, which gives two backlash extra, or it gives two backlash even if you are a standard success for psionics, uh, miracles, and magic. So it affects all three of what I call the mystic abilities. So it is a hey, no, we don't like this. As another thing, which I would do is I would look at the core rules, which when you're looking at extra effect and especially combined actions, I would almost say, especially with magic, you could have that thought of which is used for people who do flim flam and hocus pocus things, who say that they can do mystic things, and then when they're tested, they don't have it, and they're like, oh, it's because of those disbelievers are canceling out my magic. Have that happen. Have that if you look on the combined action, there's a group penalty, which is sometimes more people hurt the thing, and that bonus becomes a penalty. So if you have a lot of people standing around that magical ritual going on who don't believe, that might be a negative penalty in a way that you can slip
Oh, that's
that
fantastic.
in, and it fits that
That's a
law
lot of fun. Yeah.
of rationalism. Again, don't be bound by the rules. Read it, find the flavor, and if there's another little thing over there that fits in, bring it in. And it's part of Torg. It's talking about that group penalty. Sneak that into the law of rationalism and have some magic, psychics, and miracles go awry or have a harder time.
Their disbelief has absolute power. I love that. It's like making a stealth check with like, we're going to stealth for 6 people. Okay, well, you have a -4.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm going to cast enhance. Okay, well, all those people don't think that really works, so you have a -4. Okay, whatever. That's cool.
Yeah. Of course, I wouldn't use it every single time, but pull it out. Pull it out on those times, and we weave it into the plot. So those are our major laws. Now we'll get into the minor laws. So the first one we have is the law of acquisition. So, Mark, did you want to talk about the law of acquisition?
I don't really understand why the law of acquisition is a minor law. I mean, you can take this law and pick. The law of vengeance is gone because of the law of acquisition. That's not a minor thing. You've changed the cosm as a whole. But okay, whatever. Really, I sum this up as, and it's a very corporate, to me, it's a very corporate way of saying. The law of acquisition is all about best practices, and so we've gone into this cosm, and we see what they do well, and we don't do those things quite that well, and so we're going to acquire those skills and bring them over, and we're going to keep them because best practices means that we need to do that way because it's better. And it just you can incorporate, you can look at it, the law of acquisition being one of the things that helps the core Earth companies that are clandestine, Pan-Pacifica companies. We've had a technological breakthrough. A law of acquisition came in and major manufacturing work, and now your iPhone does something that no other iPhone does, and everybody wants your product. Never mind that it's connected into the Plex from core Earth because you did a thing. Well, whatever. Nobody really needs to know that. We won't tell them that. It just runs faster. It's cool.
Yeah, I agree. Like, this is kind of like, I don't know, it feels like the bread and butter of Pan Pacifica, in that, it really just kind of defines the entire mentality of, this whole thing is very corporate, and it's very cutthroat corporate. And so we're gonna go and we're gonna find the best stuff, and again, like those technological breakthroughs, real convenient, to be able to pull what works from other places. And just, it really kind of defines how there's this very corporate attitude, not just towards actual corporations, but towards other realities, which I find actually kind of hilarious. It's a lot of extending that mentality to things that you would perhaps not expect.
Right, like Mark said, the reserves, they invade another cosm and they save a little piece of it because they never know when something in that, whether the people or whatever, we'll just use the term resources. And even though, I want to say 30, 40 years ago, your personnel department became human resources. And whenever I hear that, I think of, oh, resources are things that you use, and that's what it kind of is. That's the mentality. There are people, humans that we use to benefit ourselves and don't really care about the humans. And that's kind of what Pan Pacifica, in my view, is they don't care about these other cosms. It's not like Lanala preserving wonders. It is we might find a use for these, so let's not just completely stamp them out. Let's keep a little piece of it there. It can't affect us in any way, shape, or form. It's completely, enclosed, but we might come back here to use stuff, which is a really scary thought. The other thing that I find very interesting in the law of acquisition is all these High Lords are going out and finding Eternity Shards. Now, Storm Knights love the Eternity Shards because they're pieces of the good side, Eternity, instead of like Darkness Devices, the bad side of the Void. And they have powers that they can use, but you kind of sometimes wonder what are the High Lords doing with them, if besides just maybe sucking out possibilities or destroying them or keeping. Pan Pacifica, they specifically collect Eternity Shards because if they get enough of them together, they can change the axioms of their world for a certain thing. And how that affects Pan Pacifica is, even though gene mods would be normally a Tech 25 thing, they're allowed and not contradictory in Pan Pacifica. So the tech didn't raise up to 25, but the acceptance in the reality of those specific gene mods and things is non-contradictory in Pan Pacifica. So that's another thing that the law of acquisition does. Then we have the law of adaptation. Mark, did you want to say anything about the law of adaptation? Adaptation, sorry.
Adaptation, yeah.
I can't read my own writing.
This is where and Rachel kind of mentioned this, that Pan Pacifica is really close to Core Earth in all respects, visually, touch and feel. Pan Pacifica looks, tastes, smells, and feels like Core Earth. There are some very subtle things that are different, but you can look at it and say, well, that's just their Asian heritage coming through.
Right. It's cultural.
So it's cultural. There you go. Yeah, it's cultural. But they're the same. And that's part of the law of intrigue, sure, but that's also part of the law of adaptation and what made their invasion so successful, because nobody saw it as an invasion. They just came in and they did some clandestine stock trades behind they made some LLCs and started buying some companies, and then those companies started having some amazing revelations and breakthroughs in technology that vaulted them to prominence. And suddenly, that law of tenacity, where the little fish can take in the big fish, right? That janitor whose side hustles security suddenly has become a major player, rivaling Kanawa, because he's got a new piece of body armor or something, and somebody's got to buy him out, whatever. Well, the law of adaptation sets that up so that you can use the law of intrigue to have this thing sliding under the radar, and that prototype maybe Kanawa needs to take these people out because that prototype undercuts something they're doing, and they're going to do it cheaper, better, faster. And they can't have that because that'll hit their bottom line. And so we got to, we can't. They've resisted our side buyout. They said, no, we're not selling because this is our company. Well, we tried to be nice. Now we're sending in the corporate ninjas. We're going to do it the hard way. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff you can do with the law of adaptation, and not just, changing some things subtly.
So this also very much plays into the we see that they're really good at that. Let's just take that for ourselves, and maybe we'll give it to this company and this side company, and we'll unveil it at the perfect moment down the road, because law of intrigue. So maybe we sit on our advancements for a little bit until it's the best moment to use that that little boost in order to undermine our enemies, and pull in some vengeance there, perhaps. But it's very much that there's all of this like subtle stuff that's going on where we're just pulling in pieces from different things and weaving our webs, and pulling it all together very subtly, so much that the reality changes may in fact be subtle as well. So I think that's really cool. One of the really cool things about Pan Pacifica.
Yeah, I like the law of adaptation. I can read my writing correctly. As both of you said, and this is the thing that allowed the invasion, or one of the things that allowed the invasion to be hidden. Because normally when the Maelstrom Bridge drops and everybody comes across, then all these people out there are mandatory upgrades in cyber papacy. Everybody is
Right.
connected to the godnet. People start become primitives and their clothes start ripping, and they're wearing leathers and stuff in living land. In Pan Pacifica, it's slow and it's subtle. So the change isn't instantaneous. The wash is slowed down. It affects fewer people. Over time, it'll start picking up once that reality start accepted. So using the iPhone thing, when the iPhone first came out, it was revolutionary. A lot of people were like, "What? It doesn't have physical buttons? How do I know if I'm going to be typing the right text message correctly?" And all of these things. But then this person gets it, he shows it to the next person, then that person's like, "Oh, that's really cool," and then it passes, and it kind of just everybody. So you can start off slow and then build outward with all of the new stuff that Pan Pacifica has. And like I mentioned earlier, with the dystopia side of it, they try to show themselves as being a utopia of a look. We use less than lethal methods in our policing. We don't go out and just shoot people. We use these electrical, katanas, which shock you and stun you. Now, it was really bad when the infection broke out, because the Jiangxi and other Xenogospog don't take shock. But it was one of those, look, our police don't kill people, look, woo, ignore the fact that our gene mods have EULAs, but we don't kill people outright, type thing. Oops, they should have paid for it. That's their fault. It's not our fault.
Like, should have read the fine print.
So you can do that, and the law of adaptation is pretty cool. Also, the reality storms, it lessens the intensity of the reality storms. So at the borders of most, and we talked about that earlier, what do you see at the borders or in these reality storms? They might just appear like a little rainstorm or mist or fog or something around the edges of Pan Pacifica. You don't know where they might be. You might be going into Pan Pacifica and not even realize it, just looking out for a reality storm. So we have one last minor world law that we'll go over today, and then part 2 we'll get into all the inspiration and GM and player ideas and tips and tricks and stuff like that. But we do have the law of perversity, which doesn't necessarily mean being a pervert. It just means things aren't normal. They don't tend to. You can't get a status quo in Pan Pacifica. So, Mark, did you have any thoughts or ideas about this?
I hate the name. I've always disliked the name. I think it should have been the law of unintended consequences, personally. This is to me, this is the Jurassic Park line. Life finds a way. There's always going to be a lab leak. There's always going to be a specimen that escapes. There's always going to be something that happens. Always. And I mean, it's just, it doesn't matter how. This is kind of like the law of tenacity. It's kind of like the law of adaptation. And it's very Pan Pacifica. There's always going to be, the infection is going to mutate. and the inoculation that you have that they've put out there, which is controlling it in places where they go, which is why it's not a thing, isn't going to work anymore eventually, because that's just how the law of unintended consequences, law of perversity, works. From a gameplay standpoint, the fifth column always shows up when the CEO's plan is just about to trigger and foils it, right? So you can use this how you want, but in my opinion, it's really when you need a reason that isn't, Deus Ex Machina, the reason they're like, well, we'll just need this to happen because so we're going to plot armor. It's not plot armor. It's the law of perversity, because here they are, or there it is, or it happened.
I love the Jurassic Park comparison for this that you just gave. That's fantastic. But yeah, this is very much the like have fun with this as a GM, because this is very much the like everything's going to go wrong eventually. And this works so well with all of the other world laws in Pan Pacifica, because, again, that underdog, his plan might randomly succeed at exactly the right moment to ruin everybody else's plans. And you might have known he was scheming, you might have known he had something going on, and then like it all comes together at the exact wrong moment. Just to really, leave your players going, oh no. And the fact that they know it's coming is part of the fun of this, because like they know that it's built into Pan Pacifica. So there's always, if you want there to be, you have that potential to just have them constantly waiting for the other foot to fall, as they wait for this to happen. So that's one of the really cool things about Pan Pacifica. You have the potential to make a very paranoid game if you want to. So if your players are going to have fun with that, definitely, steer into that. Let them be fully aware that this law is in effect and that things will go wrong eventually. It's just when and where.
Yeah, exactly. And to go back to the Jurassic Park, yeah, imagine how boring the movie would have been if all female genetically engineered dinosaurs would have never, all of a sudden been able to reproduce.
Yep, they're all dead.
Yep.
Oh,
Movie's
well.
over. Sorry.
So, yes. So, thank you, Mark and Rachel, and thank you, listeners and viewers, for watching us. I knew we wouldn't get into the High Lord and Darkness Device this time, but we'll get into them next time. We do thank you for watching, listening. If you have any questions, comments, etc., you can email us at torgdcd@gmail.com, and we will read those and answer those in the next episode. But any last thoughts or anything before we wrap up for today?
Life finds a way. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that covers it.
Yeah.
Life finds a way, and somebody in Pan Pacifica is coming for you eventually.
So, once again, thank you very much. And until next time, we hope you have fun in your own Cosmverse. Bye. We are out.
You got through it without